Welcome. This year's Student Pride and Attitude magazine are talking about LGBTQ mental health, a subject that affects every single one of us. Joining us today are comedian and author Daniel Howell.
Hi.
Drag Race UK Season 2 winner Lawrence Chaney.
Hello, hens.
Activist and icon Munroe Bergdorf.
Oh, hi. Oh.
Mental health campaigner, LBC presenter and trustee of Student Mind, Natasha Devon. Whether you are conscious of it or not, your mental well-being impacts your daily life as much as your physical health. We just don't talk about it in the same way, which is a fundamental part of the problem. Today, we are specifically looking at loneliness and isolation, a subject that many queer people relate to. Being lonely is not necessarily correlated to how many people you have around you. Not being able to express our identity can make us feel quite alone. And these feelings can manifest at the youngest of ages in the school playground and continue throughout our lives. Until we embrace our authentic selves and find our chosen families, they can continue to persist. The past year under COVID has been incredibly taxing on the majority of us. LGBTQ people have found themselves amongst the most impacted. University students have moved back home, some forced to hide their gender or sexual identity and live with homophobic or transphobic families. Other LGBTQ people have lost their jobs and been forced to do the same, while those who live alone have found themselves further isolated. Charities like the LGBTQ Foundation, Bernardo's and Just Like Us, and universities like UCL and the University of Sussex have been looking at how the pandemic has influenced LGBTQ life. The statistics, try saying that one, the statistics are tough to digest. 35% of young people said they feel lonely most of the time, despite spending 3 hours on social media. 55% of LGBT plus young people worry about their mental health on a daily basis. This is compared to just 26% of non-LGBT plus people. 1 in 4 LGBT plus secondary school pupils are experiencing daily tensions at home. And perhaps most striking is that loneliness has been associated with future mental health problems, specifically depression. So while lockdown may be easing, we're a long way from lonely just yet. But the roots of this growing mental health crisis were present before the pandemic. A BBC Radio 4 survey in 2018 that had 55,000 respondents, making it the largest survey of its type in the world, found the stereotype that older people experience loneliness most to be incorrect, with 40% of 16 to 24-year-olds surveyed saying they felt very lonely often. The same survey found that people who were discriminated against for reasons such as their sexuality or a disability were more likely to feel lonely. And only a third of that survey's respondents defined loneliness as being alone. Rather, it was more about the disconnectedness to the world and not having anybody around you that really understands you. The message is clear: loneliness and isolation are perhaps amongst the most urgent issues facing LGBTQ plus people, and the pandemic has made that immensely more challenging for us. So we're going to go to our panel. Natasha, one of the things that I think we have to understand first is breaking down the difference between mental illness, mental health issues and unpleasant feelings, because often those languages are used interchangeably. How would you define those terms?
Well, the first thing to say is that it all exists on a spectrum. So if you are experiencing consistent unpleasant emotions, that can lead to mental health issues, and then over time, if you don't have coping strategies or support available to you, then that can develop into mental illness. But I like to think of it as a spectrum with diagnosable mental illness on your kind of horizontal axis, and then your mental health on the vertical axis. And everybody exists at some point within that spectrum. So if you take me, for example, I have a long-term diagnosis of an anxiety disorder. And so that puts me on the left-hand side of the horizontal axis. But because I have a lot of support available to me, I'm very fortunate in that way, and I've had a lot of therapy, my mental health, my mental fitness is high. So I'm in the top half of that graph. That's a good place to be. So I'd encourage everybody to think, where am I on that spectrum and where do I want to be?
I think that's one of the issues, isn't it? We often talk about mental health as this singular thing, and it's seen as this all-encompassing issue. We don't talk about your physical health like that. And one of the things we spoke about earlier actually is how you said to me that if you're not feeling anxious, you're not listening to yourself.
Right. You're just not paying attention right now because the world is a skip fire. And it's not just COVID, it's all of the social and political chaos that has accompanied COVID as well. And anxiety is a normal human response to that. And we don't have to medicalize that, but people still need support. They still need to be listened to without judgment. They still need some kind of outlet for that because it can be really overwhelming.
Munroe, trans people, I guess they feel loneliness and isolation on a completely more acute level than other people do. I mean, they have to first come to terms with understanding their identity in a world that doesn't embrace them.
Yeah, it's a very insular experience. Even if you're, as you said, around people, there's an internal narrative that is almost like you don't know where it's going either. Like, before I transitioned, I couldn't see where I was going or what I was going to look like or what, the world is going to be like. I couldn't have envisioned the community coming as far as it has. I didn't know how my family was going to take it. I didn't know how it looked with me fitting into employment, how it looked with me in a relationship. So there's like all of these what ifs, but you are transitioning on faith. And that's kind of isolating as well because no one's transition looks like anyone else's. So even if you look at, say, Laverne Cox, or if you look at Paris Lees, or if you look, that transition is still not going to be yours.
Yeah.
So it's insular in that respect. But then you bring in the pandemic, and then like I transitioned 12 years ago. So all of those feelings of isolation have kind of come back a little bit. And in a way, that prepared me for this.
Yeah.
But at the same time, was still traumatic. So transitioning is a very unique experience, but we've got commonalities with, being gay, and, a lot of trans people are gay. So it's just, I think that's why it's great to use the word queer, because we've got so many shared experiences with isolation.
Daniel.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hi.
How's the pandemic?
Are you about to say how dare you ask how are you in this day and age? Fine. Right.
How's the pandemic impacted you?
Well, I didn't go outside before, and now it's normal that I'm not going outside, so I guess that's okay. I mean, for me, the thing has been, we're all isolated, we're all in lockdown, and it's been the test of what it means to be that socially awkward introvert. Because when it comes to mental health, by far the most powerful support is human connection. And I always love to joke about how I don't like humanity. I could happily live in a cave by myself with a Wi-Fi connection. See you in 85 years, if I'm not, maybe 8 to 5. But what this showed me is even at the most extreme level, you need to feel a part of something. You need to feel seen. You need to feel heard. You need to feel supportive. You need a community, especially for queer people, to just know that there's other people like that out there. And for me, being stuck inside and not having that, I found it tough. I can't imagine what it must be like for young people, especially students, because the year for me when I went to university was such an incredibly important moment for me to escape from my home environment, redefine my life on my own terms, just experiment with who I am, what is my identity. The idea that I could have just been ejected back into my home environment, I don't even know how I would have coped. So I'm thankful to be in the position where I am, and it's been tough for me, as it has for most queer people.
Actually, Natasha, you mentioned something when we spoke before the programme, just how actually the pandemic in a weird way has been comforting to a lot of people with anxiety disorders, because it means they can switch themselves off from the things that make them anxious. Yeah,
because if you tuned into your anxiety and did exactly what it told you to do, it would say, stay inside with hand sanitizers. And then suddenly that becomes what we're being encouraged to do. So I think for a lot of people, actually the transition back to normality, whatever that looks like, is going to be the thing that's going to be the most stressful and be the most difficult.
So what advice would you give somebody that's feeling anxious about the world opening up again?
Practice.
Yeah.
So I really think that there's something in fake it till you make it. If you have people that you're comfortable with, that you can practice doing small talk and socializing and all of those things that we haven't been able to do for the past year. And also envision a confident version of yourself and almost create a character. I mean, Lawrence can probably talk more about this than I can.
You'll be fine.
But yeah, you know, if you can create a confident version of yourself and imagine how they would stand and look and act and then fake it till you make it.
Lawrence, actually, I mean, that's the perfect time to bring you in.
Yeah, I know. Imagine that.
I mean, you had a very public discussion about your experience through lockdown and how it had directly impacted you, your career and your personal life, because you went from being somebody that is very public in terms of you work and you live amongst people.
Yeah.
You're on stage, you're interacting. At your worst, how did you feel?
It was really hard because I you know, with the pandemic as its own entity, you know, when that all happened, I thought, you know, my dreams had come true. I'd gone off to the Disney, you know, castle and, you know, everything was amazing. And then all of a sudden you go from being validated by people you've looked up to and connecting with new people. Because that's what, you know, I always take from my job as a drag queen is I love connecting to new people each night. And that is, you know, even when I was, you know, doing shows in bars in Glasgow with 20 people there, there'd be, you know, 18 people I'd never met before and they'd never come back again. But, you know, it was nice to connect to new people. And I think that comes from me being from a small town. But I think what shocked me was the kind of culture shock of me going back to being four walls of my room with like all of these fabulous costumes and things you've invested in. You're not wearing them, you're not doing anything, and all you can do is sit and look on your phone. That's what I found really destructive, was looking at what other people were doing on social media, queens that were doing dance performances in streets and stuff, and I was like, is this how I do it? Is this how I do it? And I felt really kind of I was unaware of what to do, and it was almost a kind of embarrassment of what am I doing then? Am I just this loser again that sits in their house and does nothing? It took a real long time to kind of accept that was how we are living now, you know, within that one box room in Glasgow.
So you said, was that triggering from when you had experienced the bullying when you were growing up? Because you said that drag was a reaction to those childhood experiences. So not being able to have that outlet must have been quite difficult for you.
I mean, literally the fake it till you make it. I've been faking it a long time. I always used to use comedy and humour to disguise if I felt uncomfortable about a situation. You know, people on a bus when I was at school, here, are you gay, and all this stuff, you know, they'd ask us, and you're like 12, you know, and you're meant to have it all figured out. And I used to use humour, you know, as that kind of defence mechanism, and that works when there's people in front of you and around you that go, but as soon as they're eliminated, what is there, you know?
There's a really powerful statement you said on Drag Race, actually, where you said you're wearing your depression on your face.
Oh yes, every single day. That's the thing though, is I've been told that many a times, is like, I think, you know, those days where you get out of bed and you're feeling a bit groggy and you go, oh, do I need to leave bed? Well, we're all feeling like that now, but I always found myself, it was subconscious, I would like make my winged eyeliner, rather than making it really bold and upward to you know, make the eye kind of angular. I would always really paint the depression on, and I don't know if that was like, you know, because you're leaning different or anything like that, but I could always, it would be friends in cars and stuff that would tell me, they'd be like, here, have you just cried, Lawrence? And I'd be like, no, you know. And, but they always knew, even through the drag war paint, you know. And I thought that was really interesting. That even Raven, you know, who does RuPaul's makeup, noticed. Maybe she's been painting the depression on RuPaul. We don't know.
No comment.
Yeah, no comment.
Daniel, you use comedy. It's very part of your identity and who you are. Do you relate to that at all?
I feel personally attacked by it, yeah. I'm sat here wearing all black, just like a funeral trying too hard. Relating exactly to what you said. I mean, yeah, definitely. Like, it's a coping mechanism. I think it's a double-edged sword, because you see a lot of people talking about this online, like, to what extent are you allowed to joke about your mental health or your experiences or anything to do with being queer? And I think that it has a positive side, which is at least you're confronting some element of truth there.
Yeah.
And if you're joking about it, it's on the table. Like, if I walk into a room and I'm like, I'm stressed, well-dressed, and chronically depressed, at least I know there's a D in there somewhere. That came out weird. But well, if you acknowledge it, that's one thing, but you can't just use that to brush it under the rug. At some point, if you've acknowledged it, you know that there's something that you need to work on. So you can't go through life making fun of your depression or anxiety, even if it's a great way to be an icebreaker and to start conversations, and for other people to be like, oh, you just made that joke, maybe that hit something within me, as long as you go, yeah, and now I know what I need to work on for my own mental health to improve.
But how do we know, and this is open to anybody on the panel, how do we know when we're joking too much and we're not dealing with the problems that actually need to be dealt with?
Well, it's like surface level.
Yeah.
So I would make these jokes about, you know, oh, Lawrence, are you gay? Are you, what are you? And I'd be like, hey, I'm, 5'9", a pure poison. You know, I would make these jokes, but it doesn't allow people into your mind. And you know, all the things we are friends with people for are friends' creativity, their sense of humor, their you know, kind of raw stories, their similarities you have growing up with them, all that stuff. How is someone meant to know what I'm going through because I'm hiding it behind that kind of war paint? You know, before I went away to Drag Race, the one thing my mum said was, Lawrence, you're very funny. Going to not joke all the time though, because she was like, I want people to see that there is more to you than just someone that's like, that there is someone that cries in every episode. You know, I thought that was a nice way to think of it. Like, yeah, we do need to let people in sometimes, you know?
Do you find social media could be a barrier to finding your true feelings? Because sometimes we can use it to mask ourselves.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a pressure to always put forward a polished version that you think people prefer. And I struggle with that, but then I also think, do I want to put like my vulnerable self on the internet? I don't know if I really need to. I think sometimes it's more important to be vulnerable with those that love you in real life than feeling like you need to share absolutely everything on social media. For me personally, I don't really want to share who I'm dating, share like my family life, my personal life. I just kind of feel like I'm keeping that for me, but in real life, I'm vulnerable with those that I love. I tell them what I need, they tell me what they need. And I think, you know, utilizing IRL, real life connections is so much more important than feeling like you're putting your whole self forward on social media to people that don't really know you. And also making sure that you're using platforms that are good for you. For me personally, I've come off of Twitter because it wasn't good for me. For some people it really works, but in the UK, we've got a huge systemic transphobia problem, and being one of the most visible trans people in the UK, on top of being queer, on top of being black, I get a lot of hate. So I'm not going to put myself on a platform that doesn't safeguard my feelings and my mental health. So I think it's just being diligent and just, you know, thinking about what is best for you.
Lawrence, how do you find social media? Because I guess with the Drag Race fandom, it can, I mean, it's an outlet for you to speak to people, but also is it quite isolating to be the solitary voice that everyone has so many expectations of?
Well, exactly. You know, what I found was before like I said, when lockdown started, that all started, all we would do was scroll on our phones and sit there, oh, so-and-so's got a cat, oh, so-and-so's doing a performance in the road. It would all be very, you would spend your time on it, right? But what I've discovered, and it's very like Munroe was saying about, it's like, I don't know if it's for me, sat there scrolling on a timeline, reading Lawrence is a fat slut. It's like, okay, you don't need to tell me that, I know. But it was something for me that I never thought of, because I just saw it as like, oh, I have friends on here and it's a way to communicate through this pandemic because we can't see each other in real life. But what I've discovered is there's other things like FaceTime and, and phone calls and stuff like that, which is probably the kind of next best thing, because that's a one-to-one interaction. Whereas when you're trying to interact with everyone on social media and try and make them all happy, make them all laugh at a time where we're not happy, we're not laughing, it's hard, and you're never going to please everyone. So I took, some people close to me's advice, and I was like, post pretty pictures, funny memes, and don't scroll too far in the comments or anything like that.
Daniel, you must relate. You've got 6.5 million subscribers.
Yeah, whatever. It's distressing, it's disturbing. Yeah, I mean, like that. That's my life story. I was born in the fires of the internet, been using it for the last 10 years, and I think that it's exactly what Lawrence was saying as well. I think anyone watching this feels like there's this pressure to use certain platforms and to be connected and to participate in everything that's going on Twitter and Instagram, but everyone needs to have a moment with themselves where they think about how the social media that they use makes them feel. How does that affect their mental health? Yeah. If the way that you're using Instagram is to compare yourself to celebrities with unattainable lifestyles, or the people that just post the highlight reels, and you just find yourself scrolling and going, oh God, my life is terrible, then you need to just follow your friends, follow some dog accounts, make some things that make you happy. Same thing with Twitter. I find Twitter incredibly stressful and horrible. I need it to make my life work. This is the hell that I've trapped myself in. But if you log on every day and you're like, oh my God, everyone's just there arguing about politics, world events are terrible, there's people just having this stressful discourse, I open the app because I feel like I need to see the conversation and it's ruined my day. You need to just strike the balance yourself between staying informed if you want to, being part of conversations, and knowing how to tailor your timeline to make it a positive force for your mental health, instead of just being trapped in that weird algorithm endorphin feedback loop of going scroll, putting it down, and then suddenly having that deep breath where you realized you've been up in your head for 2 hours, stressing yourself out.
It's difficult though, isn't it? Because Natasha, it's an outlet for people who are isolated. So on the one hand, it can be all these difficult things, but it is a very useful tool that people need to be able to use to get, to reach out.
A lot of LGBTQ young people have told me that social media has literally saved their life because it's plugged them into a community that wasn't available to them kind of three-dimensionally. But I just wanted to pick up on what Munroe was saying, because I work in education with young people. I hesitated to come out as bisexual because I came of age in the 90s when bisexuality was very much painted in a hypersexualized way, and that's a problem anyway. I do a lot of campaigning around seeing LGBTQ people beyond their sexuality and understanding the contributions to society in other ways. But actually, when I came out about my sexuality, I got relatively little crap on social media. The time I have been most targeted was when I did a speech at an education conference, and this plays into what we were talking about belonging, and LGBTQ people are more vulnerable to mental health issues. Belonging is a key human psychological need, and I was talking about heteronormative assumption and how if you exist in a world where everyone's just assuming you're straight, that makes you feel isolated, even if you're surrounded by people. And I thought, I'll apply this to trans people. So I said, look, when I go into a school, an all-girls school, and do an assembly, I don't start that assembly saying, hello, girls. I say, hello, everyone, right? Because that's a more inclusive way to start a talk. And the amount of targeted abuse I got for being a trans ally. And that's when people started saying she shouldn't be allowed near kids, she shouldn't be allowed in schools. I thought my career is over just for being an ally to trans people. So I really think that, yes, everything that you were saying about tailoring your timeline to make sure that you don't see certain things, but also the social media companies have a duty, I think, to stop vulnerable people from being targeted in that way.
Yeah.
We saw some of that last week, didn't we, where there was a discussion around eating disorders and the failure of people like Instagram to actually act on that.
Yeah.
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 With, you mentioned earlier about coming out as bisexual. I guess that can be isolated in itself within the community because there's not enough of a discussion, acknowledgement that bisexuality actually is a valid identity.
Yes, and also I am in a heterosexual relationship dynamic. So I'm aware that I have an enormous amount of privilege, and that's why when I'm on air at LBC, I try to mention my bisexuality whenever it's relevant. And obviously then you get people going, well, why should I care? And I go, well, because there might be bisexual young people listening in who need a role model, and I want to be that for them.
It's also strange, isn't it? Because we're like the majority of the LGBTQ community. Bisexual people make up the biggest percentage of the LGBTQ community, but was the most invisible. So just adding that in, letting people know.
And then
I do think that young people, when you're talking about how young people kind of find their own community and knows that's important, that it's one of the things that gives me hope for the future, because obviously the 90s was just terrible, as was every other decade, and this decade, and several future decades probably. Good luck. But I see when I go on the internet, the way that young people, you're talking about, the use of the word queer and just finding communities, it's just so accepting, and there's just so much less labeling, and people are saying like, you're free to explore your identity at your own time, you're free to be part of this community and to find allies. And I think that as terrible as social media can be, it's absolutely, I mean, it was a lifesaver for me, not as a teenager 10 years later, just seeing the representation that I didn't have in the media, and now we have publicly funded drag TV, so here's hoping.
I do sometimes wonder though, when you have such a much more liberal and accepting world where you're told that you can be whoever you be, there's access online and on social media to lots of outlets to understanding what it is to be transgender or bisexual or gay even. But yet if you live in a family or an environment which is unaccepting, can it make you feel more lonely? Because actually, oh no, the world says I'm fine. The world says I can be who I want to be. And yet my lived experience isn't that. So you must have heard from lots of people in that situation.
Yeah, and I mean, that was even my story for a while, because it was very clear to everyone in the universe that I was some kind of not straight for a long time. But the journey that I had to go on personally, just internally, to deal with my own feelings and my upbringing and telling, family and friends, versus what people in the world, I was already living in an accepting world. There was a time when I was 18 where other friends I had started to come out, and they were being accepted in school, to the people that were just treating me horrendously only a couple of years earlier. And it's the clash between what I had to do personally just to get out there versus the messaging in the world. And I think especially to trans people or any kind of young people that are trapped in a situation, they may feel like, yeah, I get that, there is a world out there that could accept me, but because of someone's incredibly specific circumstance, and you never know what someone's lived experience in, they just may not be ready to go on whatever part of that journey is yet.
So what kind of stories do you hear from younger people getting in touch with you about their own journeys? I mean, there must be still so many people that are lost and not being able to find their way, exactly what you said earlier, that everyone's transition is so unique to their circumstances.
Yeah, I think, kick over the table. I think the most common experience that I hear of are unaccepting families and young people wanting to transition but feeling like they'll lose everything. Religion comes up a lot. Parents that are heavily religious, or experiences that are heavily religious, such as going to like a very religious school or living in a religious state. And when religion becomes integral to your everyday life and culture, not just faith, but like practices, and feeling unsafe within a mosque or feeling unsafe within a synagogue or a church. I think it's it's family dynamics and a mismatch between how you're feeling and the environment that you're in. So I think environment is the common factor, and I guess how that makes you feel internally as well, because you don't want to lose your family. You don't want to lose this life that you're part of. And I see a lot of people saying that, I want to keep my faith. It's not that religion is a problem necessarily, or my faith is a problem. It's the fact that there's people that identify with the same faith that are unaccepting of me as a human being. And so I've tried to talk a lot more about faith on my platform, because I know that it really affects a lot of people. And seeing, Lil Nas X talk about that really made me feel great, because I had a lot of... I was raised in the Church of England. I never believed in it, but I held so much shame, especially coming from like a background that's Jamaican, and all of the men in my family were, quite homophobic, so I kind of carried that as well. So I think we need to really have that dialogue about, you don't need to reject, Islam. You don't need to reject Christianity. There are queer Christians and queer Muslim people, and I think it's really about having the conversation about how can we get to a place where we can, you can keep your life, but you can also be yourself. So yeah, religion comes up a lot.
Was there a turning point for you where you felt more at ease?
Yeah, I think it was really when I started speaking up about my experiences. We've known each other for a long time, and I went through a phase of really running away from myself, and that can, manifest itself in so many different ways. For some people it's sex, some people it's, drink and drugs. For me it was a combination of the two, and it was messy. And once I started speaking about how I felt, I realized that I wasn't the only one, and that isolation within myself turned into community, and I started being able to connect to other people more, because I could see my experience and my humanity. I think that I wasn't seeing my own humanity. I was just thinking, oh God, I'm a box, I'm trans, and I didn't think that there was anything to be proud about being trans. And then I started learning about trans history. I started learning, as you said, about the contributions that trans people have made, not only to the queer community, but to the world, and the pioneers. And I thought, maybe I can be my own pioneer, and maybe people will relate to my own experience. And I started speaking about my own struggles with, self-sabotage and self-destruction, and other people could see that in them as well, and then that relieved my shame, which relieved my isolation. So it's all connected, but I think that it really was a turning point in speaking up.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting what you said about finding your humanity, because we do dehumanize ourselves, don't we? Especially when we don't like ourselves, and that's born out of that loneliness and isolation.
Definitely.
It's quite a common thing we all feel. Lawrence, we spoke before we spoke today on the program about how you use cognitive behavioural therapy to unlearn all of the bullying and to start owning yourself a little bit better. How did you get to that point to seek therapy, and what did it do for you?
I was really, really lucky, because my parents were very open, and they were very, if you have any worries, whether it's the smallest one at all, or if anyone is bullying you in school, and that came from like one name calling, they'd be like, please tell us about it. Like, big or small, tell us. And so I was really lucky I had a positive environment around me where I could say, well, Mum, I don't understand why these people are saying it. And then, like all parents say, oh, they're jealous. And you go, right, they're jealous of this, really? And that then, you've then belittled yourself, because you're saying, well, why would anyone be jealous of me? Why are people doing this? And what I struggled to understand was why people... I really don't take a lot of time outside of my day to I speak to my friends, I check in on family, I make sure I'm doing good, and I do, work, and then I'll watch a film or something, I didn't understand why people would try so hard because people actively tried in school to bully me and all that. I never understood why that was the case. So when I had CBT, what I found was I would say, well, why are these people doing this to me? And it came even down to, I said, why for the school play do people want me to sew all the costumes, but they all hate me? And literally, the person doing my therapist was like, oh, it's because you're good. And even though they hate you, you're still good. And nothing can take away the fact you're good at sewing costumes. And all I thought was, why aren't they trying to stress me out with costumes? And, the stupidest thing. But I remember going, oh, wait. And that it kind of made that connection of that's why they did it. And then other instances as well, being tripped up in corridors, why that happened. It made me understand that that's on them. It's not a me thing. I'm allowed to walk down a corridor without worrying about being tripped up. So it allowed me to kind of let go of some of that high school anxiety that was still kind of haunting me going into college. And college is a different thing, compared to secondary school.
What about you, Daniel? What was your process of healing? How did you go beyond the fear that you had before to where you are now in a much more confident place?
Yeah, for me, it took hitting a kind of a mental health rock bottom to acknowledge that I had problems, because my whole life is that kind of trying to run away from it and escape it until I get to a point where I'm like, I don't function day to day because there's something that I'm not acknowledging.
What were you doing when you weren't functioning?
I was basically heavily depressed before I knew I was, and then I was like, is it normal to not enjoy anything? Is it normal to not eat anything and then just binge eat for ages, or to not to speak to anyone, or want to get out of bed or open the curtains or something? And then it was and this just goes to show, even 5-6 years ago, the whole world was just so ignorant when it comes to mental health. What has been accomplished in conversations around mental health, normalizing it and educating people in the last 2 or 3 years is profound. And I didn't even know this stuff. And it took me to basically go right, I have to, make this happen myself. I need to Google a therapist. I need to go on this journey. And it was the same thing for me from depression to coming out, where for me as a creator, I was like, I can't continue to be a funny clown on the internet while I know that I'm still in the closet, because there's just a huge part of my authenticity that's my creativity and my personality. I just cannot continue to function until I get over this hurdle. And I think if anyone is at home, resonating with this, it's that idea that you can't always procrastinate things. You can hold it off to get out of your environment, and you can put things off until you get yourself in a position where you can tackle things. But the moment you come out, or the moment that you deal with your mental health, you will have a profoundly transformed life, and you need to do it as soon as you can.
So what are the first steps, Natasha, to recognising that we need help, that we're not just having a couple of down days, this is something that needs assistance, and where do we go?
Well, I think it's really important not to self-diagnose. That's the first thing. Young people always say to me, how would I know if I had depression or an anxiety disorder? And I'm kind of like, well, you wouldn't. That's something that a professional needs to assess in you. But there's kind of 3 indicators. The first is if you have no ability to function. So like I say, it's normal to feel anxious, particularly right now, in response to specific stimulus in your environment. But if that's stopping you from focusing and concentrating and performing and socializing, then that would be the first indicator. The second is if it's just all the time and there's nothing specific going on to cause it, but you feel like that all the time. And then they say in all of the psychology books that it's for a period of longer than 2 weeks. That would be when you would book an appointment with your GP or your school counsellor or whoever's on campus or whoever. I should say as well that I recently discovered that every GP surgery in England theoretically is supposed to have one doctor who specialises in mental health, because mental health's a tiny component of compulsory GP training, which makes no sense because 1 in 3 GP visits is for a mental health issue. So if you just get whoever you're given, you're kind of playing Russian roulette. They might not know anything about it. So when you call your GP, ask for the person who specialises.
That's really useful to know, actually. I'm sure it's news to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
So how, I want to ask all of you this, how do we practice good mental health today, especially in the current climate where, you know, lockdown's easy and we're all supposed to be rushing out, sitting in beer gardens and throwing caution to the wind, like we'll go this way round. What do you do on a daily basis to practice good mental health?
I think there's so many aspects to looking after yourself. For me, one of the big things is just remembering what I've learned about how to have conversations with myself. So I'm someone that has taught myself incredibly bad things about doubting myself and feeling bad and slipping into spaces where I feel really anxious or really depressed. And I have to always second guess my thoughts. Sometimes in the middle of the night, I have to snap myself out of being up in my head with anxiety for 2 hours and go, that doesn't make any sense. That's just a thought. I'm not being chased by something literally right now. I'm lying horizontally in a bed. And most of my life is that. And then it's just trying to keep up that healthy lifestyle that's conducive with mental health as much as you can while everyone's locked down and you can't do anything or go anywhere. But for me, support has been the main thing. So I've scared a lot of friends that are used to me being aloof by calling them up and going, hi, how are you? And they're like, who the hell is this? No, we need to do this these days. So try it. It's scary.
Lawrence?
I find being creative is my way to keep my mental health in balance, because it in an environment where we don't have people around us to you know, for someone like me, I love makeup and styling hair and sewing and things like that. So I originally, you know, when lockdown started, I was like, what am I going to do now? There's nothing to sew for, and that's hence the spiraling. And then it took me getting back into these kind of passion projects that you find yourself going, wow, I really did that. And you find that appreciation for something you have done in a kind of moment where you've not been appreciating anything about yourself. So I found that really helped me.
For me, it's noticing the signs that things are heading south. I try to self-care continuously rather than only self-caring once it's gotten to the point where everything's falling apart. And that's how it used to be. Yeah, I try to notice whether or not I'm speaking to myself in an unkind way. If I start to think that I can't do things when things come in into the email inbox and start thinking, oh God, you know, I'm not capable of this. I start doubting my capabilities. That's another sign. If my sex drive goes, that's usually a sign as well. If I'm not, you know, in tune with my body, I think it's very important to be in tune with your body. And also if I start self-sabotaging, whether or not that's with relationships or with parents or, you know, if I start putting up the barriers. So I think it's just recognizing the signs that things aren't okay and then doing the self-work and not running away from yourself again. So not, you know, deciding to go out rather than focusing within. I think that's usually what I try to do. Just try to reel it back before it, you know, completely unravels.
I'm really wary of ever glamorizing mental illness because it's not glamorous at all. But having said that, I do think that the process of recovery from mental illness is similar to the process of coming out, insofar as you go, okay, I don't fit in the box that society's told me I'm supposed to fit into. I have to work out how I think, where I fit, how I'm going to relate to other people, how I respond to things. That's a really valuable process. And that's why I always say people who are in recovery from mental illness are the sanest people I know. LGBTQ people are some of the best people I know because they've taken the time to do that introspection. Mm-hmm. And it's that self-awareness that's a really valuable thing. So I think for me, it's when I have that blip, rather than going, oh no, you know, this is a waste of time getting back to normal. Rather, this is an opportunity for me to learn something about myself that's going to be helpful moving forward. And probably the most valuable thing I learned about myself is that I have obsessive compulsive drive. So when you have anxiety, people always say to you, have a lavender bath. And I don't find lavender baths relaxing. I lay in them and go, I've got a massive to-do list. And so I realize I'm actually happier when I'm channeling that anxious energy into a project. Doesn't have to be a paid project, doesn't have to be for anything. But knowing that about myself actually allowed me to be much happier. I can't chill out, and that's okay.
That's your new book
incredible.
title.
Yeah.
It's true though. I mean, that's 4 excellent pieces of advice, and they're all very distinct, but they all have the same thing in common, and that's pay attention to what you're saying to yourself and how you can move that forward. We're gonna have to wrap up, but I just want to divert everybody to 2 websites. I mean, there's countless of websites out there and places you can go to for help. Your GP, for example, which we've just learnt today, which has been used to everybody here, but also mentalhealth.org.uk, switchboard.lgbt is an incredible service, but also just call a friend, as we've heard today. But good luck, everybody, and stay safe and stay sane.
Ciao.